Hello, and welcome to Preparing Students to Pitch, presented by Debi Kleiman, Executive Director of the Arthur M. Blank Center for Entrepreneurship at Babson College. I'd like to remind everyone USASB is accepting submissions for the USASB 2021 virtual event. The submission and nomination platform is your one-stop shop for submitting to any of our research, teaching, and program tracks at the virtual event, as well as all award nominations, including the Model Program Awards, SIG Awards, and Lifetime Achievement Awards. It also hosts application for our DOC Consortium and Longenecker Fellows Mentorship Program. I encourage you to visit usasb.awardsplatform.com today to learn more about the various submissions available for USASB 2021. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, Brittany Garner at bgarner@usasb.org. And I am happy to introduce today's presenter, Debi Kleiman, Executive Director of the Blank Center for Entrepreneurship at Babson College. Babson has once again been named #1 in undergraduate entrepreneurship education by U.S. News and World Report for the 24th year in a row. Debi is also the author of First Pitch, Winning Money, Mentors, and More for Your Startup. Without further ado, I will turn our time over to Debi for preparing students to pitch.
Wonderful. Thanks, Brittany, and welcome everyone. I'm really glad that you're able to join us today and hopefully learn a little bit about what I've put together as part of my book and help your students be better pitchers, because as we all know, as entrepreneurship educators, that is one of the skills that they all will need to use, and certainly many, many times over. They really need to get great at communicating their pitch and communicating about their company in general. And of course, you know, given the subtitle of my book, it's really not just about raising money. It's also about, you know, getting advisors and mentors to lean into the business. It's getting PR and influencers and first customers to get excited about the business. And it all kind of tracks back to how you communicate the pitch and really how you tell that story. So just to start us off real quickly today, I was hoping that you would put into the chat box some of the things that either worry you or you find challenging about pitching, teaching students to pitch today. You know, what are things that you find that they struggle with the most, or that you really need resources on how to teach more effectively? Throw a couple of those in the chat box, and I'll have Brittany read those out a little bit, and let's just sort of see where everybody's head is at coming into today's presentation. We have a bunch to go through today, and the way that I'll present this information is I'll sort of some of it I'll present as if you're my students and I'm teaching you how to pitch. So I do teach this at Babson. I teach it both in the undergrad, the grad, and in exec ed. And so the book is really based a lot on my class and how I've, over the years, sort of found a way to teach this that has been proven to be really effective and really easy for students of all kinds to grasp and, you know, build a better pitch. So there'll be times when I'm showing you things that I would show students, and then there'll be times where I'm sort of breaking the fourth wall and talking to you as educators and sort of saying, this is how I would do it, you know, maybe take pieces of it, whatever feels comfortable for you and how you want to teach it, or, you know, take it wholesale and teach it this way yourself, whatever works for you. So that's how I'm kind of hoping to go through today. Some of the learning objectives I talk about in the book and that I have for teaching pitching are as follows. I think teaching entrepreneurs how to do storytelling and how to tell stories around their companies is incredibly important and probably one of the hardest skills for them to learn. Also, creating their value proposition and finding a unique, ownable place to talk about what's special about their business. I also talk a bunch about and provide frameworks for how you develop an elevator pitch and then how you develop a longer, you know, investor type pitch. And then there's this whole element of how you behave in a pitch and some of the ways you build relationships as you're going through your startup journey in order to get money, mentors, and more for your startup. And so those things are kind of around coachability and building trust and, you know, letting people get to know you as a founder, because it's such a reflection of the kind of company you're going to build. Quick touch on pitching online, because I know that's certainly on everybody's minds these days. I wrote the book in last year and finished it in January, and then obviously the pandemic happened in March, and so had I finished it later, I certainly would have had a chapter on pitching online, but I've since, created a bunch of material around this, so I'll just cover that briefly because I think it's important stuff. And then the last thing is really about audiences and the different types of audiences they pitch to. I think it's important for students to really understand some of the differences in the way different audiences hear their message and what they're looking for, and the kinds of things they should know about reaching out to different types of people, whether it's for raising money, how do you reach out to an angel versus a VC, or how do you reach out to someone in the media for PR versus how do you reach out to a first customer. So hopefully we'll get through all that. If we don't, a lot of it's in the book, so you can get it from there, but I'm hoping we'll get to at least touch on all of these real quickly. So Brittany, tell me a little bit about what's in the chat box, because I can't see it.
All right, so some of the challenges we have are pitching online, how to effectively tell a story with their pitch. Also, alongside that, being succinct in both the words and visuals, and that balance between the two.
That's a good point. Yep.
Yep, and that's it.
That's all we got? Okay. Yep. Well, those are good because we're going to cover those. So, because those were challenges for me too. I mean, those were things that I found really difficult in trying to teach students these skills as well. And what's interesting is that I actually found a lot of inspiration for this, what's in the book and for my methodologies from my previous career before I came to Babson, and that was as a marketer. I spent over 20 years as a consumer packaged goods marketer in very large companies, and then went and became a CMO and a marketing leadership for several startups. So my background is in marketing, and certainly storytelling is so integral to being a marketer. It's very much about how we sell the products that we sell. And what I saw was this really interesting parallel to teaching students how to storytell, because in your pitch, you're trying to convince people to do something for you, trying to change their behavior. It's the same thing in marketing, right? You're trying to get your customers to do something, persuade them to change their behavior. So a lot of the elements end up being very much the same. And so I took this training that I had in brand marketing, particularly a good example is Coca-Cola, where I worked for many years, which has, obviously built an incredible brand, world-renowned, and they did that through storytelling and building an emotional connection with their audience through the way that they communicated. And this is exactly what is so important when we're teaching students how to storytell. So when I worked at Coke, our positioning was happiness. It wasn't about a fizzy brown drink. It was Coke is happiness. And so that's an emotion, and all the storytelling we would do in our ads and our commercials and the ways we reached out to consumers really was about this idea of happiness. And so that people would feel that about Coke and take it as different, find it differentiated, when in reality it's slightly different tasting, but otherwise pretty much this serves the same benefits as other beverages. So the idea of having a good story and creating emotional connection can really elevate a brand or a pitch or a person to another place that connects with their audience a lot. So one of the things I wanted to start with, and this is an example that I show my students, is the story of Emily Levy. And Emily Levy was my student back in 2016. She's a phenomenal entrepreneur, and she suffers from chronic Lyme disease and started a company called Mighty Well. At the time of this video I'm going to show you, the company was called Pick Perfect, and what it was a PICC line cover. If you see that blue piece of fabric covering her arm, it was about, finding a way to not let her disease define her and, feel empowered versus defeated by it, because she was able to cover up her PICC line with fashionable, breathable, athletic fabrics that made her feel good. And so she, obviously elevates her story about empowerment and confidence versus just a piece of fabric that's going to cover her PICC line. So I'm going to show you a quick bit of her pitch, just so you can see how she pulls this off.
Emily Levy, and this is my pitch. To all of you, I may look like your average college student, but since the 7th grade, I've been suffering from severe chronic Lyme disease and co-infections. My doctor decided to place a PICC line in my arm for long-term antibiotics treatment, and I had to do my treatment at my 8 a.m. finance class, and the cute hockey player next to me looked at me like I was a walking disease. I knew that there had to be a better way. Our first product is our PICC line cover that allows for patients to have ease of access and dignity while going through treatment. We believe that all patients deserve dignity and confidence while going through treatment because we're still people too. Visit our website, pickperfect.com, and share your story on our blog, Lime into Lemonade.
So Emily's pitch is awesome. I hope you thought it was awesome too, because I think it's pretty awesome. Because what she does is this really wonderful thing in just such a short amount of time, right? She's able to tell the story of why she created her business really quickly. You immediately feel empathy for her, but you find humor, you find insight, you know, the fact that she talks about flirting with her 8 a.m. Hockey player in her class. Those are things that, you know, people can relate to even if they haven't flirted with a hockey player in their class before. They can relate to a college student wanting to do that. And so she tells the story with great heart and empathy, and you really kind of lean in because you want to know what she's building and why. And then she ends it both with great body language and a great story where she sort of shows the PICC line cover, but at the same time she's making this muscle, right? She's showing strength and power in showing the PICC line cover. So she uses her body in a really effective way. And then she ends it with talking about empowerment and confidence. And, you know, we believe these things as a company. And so you want to believe them too, and you want to join her. So she takes up all those things that I teach about storytelling and does them really, really well. So, you know, as I mentioned before, I really think that stories sell, just like they do in marketing, they do in a pitch, and bringing your narrative to life is really incumbent upon being able to help students pick words that connect to emotions, that allow them to connect to some type of emotion or some kind of laddered up feeling versus just this thing that they're building, just not the what, but really something to feel about that product. So when I'm talking about this idea of using words that connect to emotion, I talk about Jamie Siminoff's invention, the Ring doorbell. So many of you may know what the Ring doorbell is. It's an online doorbell. You operate it off your phone. It's an app on your phone. You don't even have to be home to see who's at your front door. And Jamie talked about this online doorbell invention he made to everybody, and it really wasn't doing very well. And he was really, you know, trying so hard to make this work because he really believed in this invention. And he went on Shark Tank and he completely blew it. None of the sharks invested. Nobody was very excited about what he was building, like, oh, online doorbell, okay. But later on, Jamie started to talk about Ring doorbell as neighborhood safety. And he talked about it as, you know, the thing that's going to enable you to have neighborhood safety, and those two words, neighborhood and safety, have a lot of emotion to them, right? You picture your neighborhood, who's in your house, who's on your street, your front yard, maybe your family. You picture safety also. Safety is a word that you can unpack in a lot of different ways, and it has a lot of really good feelings connected to it. And it also creates an image in your head. So by starting to talk about his invention, laddered up to something like neighborhood safety, he did such a better job connecting to customers. He did such a better job making them feel something really important about his product. And, you know, the story goes that he, you know, was wildly successful after that, and after finding that kind of way to talk about his product and to advertise it, and really fed that into all fibers of the company, and eventually sold the company to Amazon for over $1 billion. So this stuff works. So some of the other things that I talk about with students is using a show me, don't tell me narrative. We talk about using metaphors or words that create an image. So the example I use there is this idea, our communications director actually showed me this one, which I thought was really powerful, particularly for students, because if you say to a student, you know, can you run 100 yards? you may or may not know what 100 yards looks like, but if I say, can you run the length of a football field? You definitely know what a football field looks like. You picture the stadium, you picture the green grass, you picture the white lines. Most people can picture what 100 yards looks like when you put it in context of a football field. And that's a great example of showing how metaphors or words, being really careful and picking the right words in your pitch that can be unpacked into something larger or more emotional can really have a great effect. So that's another piece of guidance I give them. And then certainly, on the storytelling aspect overall is this idea of taking your listeners on a journey. And so one framework I offer for that is this idea of the hero's journey. And many of you are probably very familiar with the hero's journey. I mean, it's obviously basic to almost every fairy tale, every story, every movie sort of follows this framework of the hero's journey. So I spend a bunch of time in my class talking through the hero's journey using a bunch of different startups and showing how their problem solution statement really follows that arc of sort of the world before, you have a problem and it comes to a climax and it's at its worst. And then, somewhere directly after that climax, after you've built all that drama about how bad this problem is and how it needs to change, you come in with your solution that is going to transform the world, and you end sort of in the place where the world after is representative of how your company has changed the world. Your solution has made a big difference and the world is different because of it. So this idea of going from the world before to the world after. And so it's really effective actually for students to see this story arc and to sort of feel that flow, because if you start to talk to them about, their favorite movies or their favorite shows or their favorite stories, they can start to relate to this idea of the classic story arc and how they talk about their problem solution statement. So that's another tool that I use. I go through it a lot longer in class, but it is one framework that I found to be really helpful because there's just so many examples of how it plays out, and it ends up being simple enough for them to understand in order to bring it to life using their pitch. The next piece of the storytelling part of it, and certainly something that's so important to every pitch and every startup, is really just being able to define your unique value proposition. So the way I talk about this with my students is really, what's your secret sauce? What do you do better than anyone else that a competitor would pick you over anything else in the world, that you are special for, that is ownable to you and that nobody else can say? And this is as I'm sure all of you know, this is an incredibly difficult thing to get to for startups. It takes a long time, it takes a lot of research before we even get to writing these out and working on these. We're asking our students to go do a whole bunch of research with customers, do interviews, not just surveys, but do interviews and really understand what's the insight, what's the key insight that they're working towards, and understanding what their product really is offering that's different or special. And so I kind of try to illustrate this using some tech companies that they probably know and show how important a unique value proposition is to building a brand or building a company. So, obviously Apple's a great example there because their unique value proposition with the Apple iPhone was always this magical user experience. And, everybody knows that the iPhone isn't different than any other phone. It doesn't have some magic button, but what it does have is this magical user experience. And so for people who love Apple products, they love modern simplicity, design, and they love that magical user experience. So it feels really like something they want very, very much. And so showing them a bunch of examples about how that plays out with companies they already know is helpful. But also, encouraging them to do that research with customers to truly understand what's different or what needs to be different about what they're delivering. And often it tracks back to this idea of an emotional or social need. So again, we're trying to find a way to use language and to use the concepts involved with the business to create an emotional connection with the audience. And often the unique value proposition ties into what that emotional or social need might be for the customer, even though they may not know they have that emotional or social need. So we spend a lot of time, really emphasizing this idea that it's a why or a how. It's not a what. It's not the what the product does. It's a why or a how. It's a benefit to the customer. It's not a feature of the product. And that is, it takes a long time for students to really understand how that plays out. But then once they do, it's like this light bulb goes off and they really get it and they get really excited, because it opens a lot of doors for them about how they want to market their company, how they want to talk about their company. It can play out in numerous ways once they've landed on a unique value proposition that they're excited about, and that's really, really ownable for them. So, you know, a worksheet that I use for this is an exercise related to an exercise I asked them to do, where I asked them to list all the things about the competition that they think the customer values. I'll then ask them to list all the things about their offering that the customer values, and then to look at those lists side by side and to be really truthful and honest about what do they have that's different from the competition, that's better than the competition, and to really take that into the unique benefit for the customer, and then take that unique benefit for the customer into some emotional outcome, some emotional result of having that unique benefit. So an example might be Boston Children's Hospital was an example I used recently in Boston. It's, you know, a renowned children's hospital. Their unique value proposition is really around this idea of better outcomes and better results for children because they have the best doctors in the world. And so that plays out into a unique benefit around hope. So, you know, you talk about the idea of hope, that Boston Children's Hospital owns hope better than any other hospital in the world. And their tagline is until every child is well. And that's very inspiring, right? That their mission in life, their reason for being is to make sure that every child is well. And that's a very hopeful statement. So you can see sort of how that unique value proposition then plays out in their marketing. So I find this just a helpful worksheet so that they can sort of play out that filtering down into the unique benefit and then turn it into an emotion, or ladder it up into something bigger than the benefit itself. So I'm going to show you an example of a pitch where someone does this really well. This is another student we've had here at Babson. And she is a former WNBA basketball player, and her company Playa Society is about trying to create athletic wear for female athletes. And so it's not about athleisure wear, it's not about yoga pants, it's really about, you know, the t-shirts and shorts that female athletes love to wear and want to feel comfortable in, and really identify with as their place as a female athlete. So listen to Esther. Whoops.
Our community is just as strong as our branding and our design. I didn't start playing basketball until I was 15. I couldn't imagine being an athlete before then simply because I wasn't exposed to women's sports. My story is just one example that representation is really important, because girls cannot become what they cannot see. So I created Playa Society to change that narrative, to elevate women's sports, and to use sportswear as a platform to define female athlete culture, so that seeing women who play sports becomes as common as seeing women who do yoga, and so that t-shirts and basketball shorts become as essential as sports bras and leggings. Thank you.
And so I love what she does there, because she really elevates her unique value proposition, this true deep understanding of what female athletes really want from their sportswear, and she elevates it into this idea of, you know, a platform for female athlete culture. We're talking about t-shirts and shorts, and she's able to build it up into this much bigger emotional idea that, you know, people really can care about. So I'm going to break for a second right here and just see if there are any questions so far. And if you do have questions about what I've just talked about, feel free to jump into the chat box and put them in there. But you know, this first part was really about, you know, storytelling and unique value proposition, and the need to cover these topics in depth with your students before you even get them building a pitch, because what I've found in my experience is that at least for me, teaching pitching all these years and being a marketer, I come to the table with all this knowledge already. And so I make certain assumptions about what our students know or don't know. And what I found is actually you got to go really far back into the process, you know, really far into digging in with them about why they're starting these companies, what do they believe in, what's their reason for being, you know, and really force them to go deep into these things, not just very superficial things. And in order to get them to, you know, find their why and find their how and find what's magical about their company. And so it does require a little bit of this, like almost like a therapy session where you're sitting with the students and you're talking to them and you're asking them questions about really what's driving the creation of this company. Brittany, are there any questions in the chat box at all?
Yeah, so one of the questions that came in is, can you give examples of what would go into competition in your form, the form that you had shared?
What would go into a competition?
The competition in the form that you share with your students to have them fill out.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. The competition box is really to list what the competition is really good at. So if you ask the customer about the competition that you're up against in your category, what would they say is great about the competition? What would they say that they love about what the competition does? And then the idea is that you list what you're great at and what you think the customer loves about you. And you compare those two lists, and then hopefully you come out with something that only you can do that the competition doesn't do.
Thank you. And another question that came in is, how do you build credibility in your pitch to avoid being perceived as a greenwasher?
A greenwasher. So like, I'm assuming that means, you know, like a do-gooder without, you know, the credibility to say that you've actually, you know, done something to change the world before?
Yes, authenticity.
Authenticity, got it. Well, I think, you know, authenticity is really tied to the story that they tell, because ideally the story that they're telling is about an individual, and even better, about themselves. So, you know, telling a general story about, you know, people who like coffee really want a better place to get their coffee is not a good story. Telling a story about yourself and wanting to find a place where you find community and have your coffee and catch up on the news, which is Starbucks, or used to be Starbucks, is a much better way to get into it, right? You're telling something that you believe or you know to be a problem, so it is authentic because it's about you, and it's about how you feel. And generally the assumption is that if you feel this way, and you're building a company around that, then many people feel this way, and it is a problem for many people. And so telling the story either from your point of view, having experienced this problem really deeply and dramatically, or telling the story of someone, a person, an individual who has experienced this problem very deeply, and it opened your eyes to this. That's how you build authenticity into it, because it's coming as a personal narrative. It's coming from your experiences, and not just in a general way, like I saw the data and it made me think of this company.
Excellent. We have a question that goes back to Emily's pitch. Share, if you can, what it took to get that refined, smooth 30 seconds. About how many rough cuts do you think? Parsing through the feedback, balancing the problem, solution, and addressable market, and if there are any naysayers.
Well, so Emily has probably won more pitch competitions than any entrepreneur I've ever worked with. I think she won 25. And she, you know, financed the whole first several years of her business based on money she won in competitions. She became such an excellent pitcher, as you saw there. But that was still early days for her, because the company was still called Pick Perfect then. And that video was from 2016, I believe, or 2017. So it was still early days for her. It did take a long time. It was a lot of coaching and a lot of work to get to the level that she pitches there. I mean, in terms of that take or that filming of it, you know, I'm pretty sure it went quite fast, actually, because she got really good at pitching, and I don't think it was a ton of takes. There's actually, if you watch that video all the way through, at the end, there are a bunch of outtakes of where she's making mistakes, but it's not mistakes about her story. It's just mistakes in saying it. So it took a lot, but more so just to really understand how to articulate her why in a way that other people could care about it. So for her, this problem was so personal and so something that she struggled with so much, but she was able to really understand this sort of universal feeling about the problem by knowing other people who were in the same situation and talking to them and really understanding the things that they struggled with. And so that's why, you know, spending time understanding the problem really deeply before you try to come up with a problem solution statement like that is so important. So yeah, it did take a while and it took a lot of iteration, but that's the pitch process. I mean, I think you only learn how to make a great pitch by doing it over and over and over again, so that it comes out of you so naturally and it just flows in like a very conversational, powerful way. So yeah, I think that it took a long time, but in terms of that take in and of itself, I don't think it took a long time to film her, because she was already at the point where she knew that problem statement and that story so well, and had gotten such great response to it in the past.
Thanks, Debbie. Those are all the questions we have right now.
Okay, great. So, you know, relative to what we were just talking about, we also obviously teach elevator pitch a lot. We make our students pitch at Babson all the time. I mean, honestly, almost in every class they take from the beginning of the time that they get here as freshmen, we're asking them to pitch all the time. Even if they're not entrepreneurs, we're asking them to pitch themselves for projects. We're asking them to pitch company ideas. We're asking them to pitch you know, in class to, you know, sway the class's opinion on something. So it is something that's really ingrained, like pitching is something that's very ingrained in the Babson way and our way of teaching. It's really important to us that students do get comfortable expressing themselves and showing themselves, because as you guys know, the whole point of the pitch is really about helping people get to know you. It's not just about the problem solution statement. It's really also just having them show themselves as a founder or a student or a business person, that they're thoughtful and that they're human and connected and they understand, you know, what they're talking about. And so, you know, some of those softer things are just as important to teach as, you know, some of the really, you know, obvious, more concrete things about pitching. And so when it comes to the elevator pitch, you know, what I tell my students is, you know, this should come out of you in about 20 seconds. You should be able to get it out. I use this framework because, again, it's from the marketing world. This is a positioning statement. When I was at Coca-Cola, whenever we had new products to launch, we would have to come up with a positioning statement about where it stood in the market and how it was different. And so I thought about this when I started to teach pitching, and I really thought it was a great framework for how you start to think about your pitch. Now, most students don't end up saying this exact sentence. This sentence is actually just a starting point, and it's meant to just give them all the pieces in one place and an easy thing to remember. You know, often the elevator pitch will turn into 2 sentences or 3 sentences, or they'll flip the order for some reason that's more comfortable for them. So the idea is not to say to them that this is how an elevator pitch should go and you have to follow this. The idea is to help them feel comfortable in it and do it in a way that's comfortable for them, but it needs to have all these elements. So when I teach elevator pitch, I spend some time talking about target customer, because what I really don't want them to do is use demographics, right? We really want them to talk about psychographics to show that they have a particular insight or knowledge about the customer that maybe other people don't have. And so that blank for the target customer needs to have several adjectives associated with the customer that really describe who they are as people. The other thing that we spend a lot of time on when we're doing elevator pitches is coming up with a concise description of the customer need. And, you know, so that's the problem, right? What do your customers need? What are they missing? And it could be an emotional or social need they don't even know they have, but typically this is something that's involved with your problem statement. And so trying to get the words right to describe the customer need is also something that takes a lot of trial and error, where you're sort of playing with different words, but you're really trying to find words that, again, are going to connect people to the problem in a really human way versus things that are dry or boring. But at the same time, you know, we're not encouraging them to use jargon. We're not trying to encourage them to use really big words. We're trying to make this as simple and clear as possible. So it's this real balancing act of trying to use words that have meaning and metaphor and interest with not going overboard into jargon and things that are complex, and trying to keep it simple. And it's a real balancing act. And as teachers, this is part of our job, is to help them find that balance and to see that balance and to be able to judge that balance. And then, of course, the other thing that's, you know, that we spend a lot of time on is that unique differentiator blank, which is, you know, our unique value proposition and how that connects into, you know, what's special about us. So, you know, ideally, they're going to get to a place when they give their elevator pitch that they can give it anywhere, anytime. It doesn't have to be in a competition. It's not when they're being filmed. It could be in line. Getting food. It could be anywhere that they are at a party and someone says, what are you working on? And the thing I talk to them a lot about is just this idea of the elevator pitch isn't supposed to give the whole story away, so don't feel pressure to, you know, get everything into those 20 seconds. The idea is that the whole point is to get people to ask another question, to get them to lean in and say, ask a clarifying question or ask for more information. So it's really meant to, you know, engage them in a conversation. And so that seems to be a really helpful way to take a little pressure off them, but also to, you know, allow them to have some fun with it, to think about how they could engage someone in a conversation by, you know, by giving some information about their startup, but not the whole kit and caboodle. So I think that it is a good, this is a good statement to start with. If you think that it's too much at first or too overwhelming, then just start with the problem solution statement and get them really, really solid on the problem solution statement, and work that part really hard, and then move on to this framework. The other thing that's in my book that I think is really helpful for educators is this idea of the 4H framework. And the 4H framework kind of came out of all my years looking at pitches. I mean, I've watched as a competition judge, as a teacher, as a angel investor, as a mentor in multitude of accelerator programs. I've seen thousands of pitches. And what I kind of realized over time was that the best pitches sort of followed this 4H framework. And it's really simple, and it's really meant to be a guide for their talk track. So I don't advise students to create a script for their talk track. What I advise them to do is sort of create this 4H framework where they know what they're going to talk about in each section of the pitch. So the framework allows them to memorize what they want to say, but not say it in a way that sounds really scripted. So it goes like this. The first H is the headline, and that is about setting the context for what you're going to talk about in this pitch. If you're using slides, it's often a 5 to 9 word phrase underneath your company name on the title slide. And it is something that starts to give people context for what they're going to hear about. Maybe it gives away a little bit about the industry. Maybe it gives away a little bit of something about your unique value proposition. And it really settles people in and gets them ready to listen. We know from brain research that our brains crave meaning before detail. And so what you really need to do is give them a little bit of meaning before you dive into that detail, and it allows them to take it in a lot easier. The other thing we know about brain research, and I forgot to mention this during storytelling because it is actually a really important part of storytelling, is that our brains love stories. Our brains are wired to remember them. And so the importance of storytelling is really about being memorable. And so that's where this heart section comes in, you know, make me feel something. You want them to remember the story that you told, that you want them to feel something, and they're more likely to remember it. And you want them to remember it because they may then be more active in trying to find ways to help you, or they may retell it to someone else who can also help you. And then there's this ripple effect. And then the other piece of brain research tells us that when our brains are in listening to stories, our brain goes into listening mode. And so we're kind of leaning in and we're kind of taking it all in and we're really engaged. versus when we're hearing dry facts and kind of boring information, our brains go into evaluation mode. And what evaluation mode means is that you're looking for errors and you're being judgmental about what you're listening to. And that's the last place where you want to start your pitch. You don't want to start the pitch with people questioning what you're saying in their heads or being suspicious of what you have to say, that it's not true or that, you know, it's not relevant to them. You want them to be open and be ready to take in your message. So that's about the heart section, where you're really trying to get them to feel something, you're doing some storytelling. The head section is usually the biggest part of an investor pitch or a competition pitch, where you're telling the audience or the judges how this product works or service works. You know, what does it do? And it's questions about, you know, how do you make money? What's the business model? Some information about the size of the market, who the competitors are, what's your go-to-market, all those kinds of things, all those questions that are in their heads as they hear you start to introduce your company, this problem and solution statement. And so the head is really factual, it's analytical, and you're really just trying to explain it. But what I tell my students is that at all times you should be analyzing your sentences and what you're saying to make sure you're emphasizing that value proposition. Every single thing you say about how it works, track it back to why that matters to the value proposition. You know, we have a great user experience that allows people to provide ratings and reviews because our user experience is so integral to what is unique and important about what we're building. And then end on your hope. And your hope is really your big finish, where you're going to try to inspire people with the vision of the company and where you want to go and where you want to take it. And again, the idea here is to sort of take what you've just talked about, which is sort of the here and now, this product you're working on right now and what you're doing, and ladder it up to something bigger, a bigger vision for how you hope the world is changed by what you are building, or how you hope a major industry or a category or an experience is changed by what you can do. And so, like many others that came before me, I use Airbnb as an example to play out the 4-H framework for my students, and it really helps them understand, you know, how this can sort of flow out as a pitch deck. With your pitch deck. And so what I did is I looked at the Airbnb deck from 2008, 2009, when they were first pitching this company. And if you remember, it was really, really novel. And so their pitch deck says book rooms with locals rather than hotels, and that's their headline. That's on their title slide. And immediately, you know, this is about travel. This is about staying somewhere other than a hotel. And then, oh my gosh, their unique value proposition, staying with locals. Wow, that's super interesting. Now I want to hear more. If I were pitching it, I would have gone into a story about an uninspired trip to Barcelona, how I had saved for years to go there, only to spend a lot of money on a hotel in a really touristy section, and having missed, you know, 75% of what Barcelona is really about, because I didn't realize when I was there that I was spending all this money to be in a part of Barcelona that isn't the real, you know, historic or authentic Barcelona, and how aggravating and upsetting that would have been was for me. In the head section, I move into how it works. It's an online platform. You get a percentage of bookings. It's a huge market. It's budget travelers who are currently underserved. And then the hope section is this idea that travel is transformed. The world is more connected. So that's a big idea, right? We're not talking about booking rooms anymore. We're talking about the world being transformed because people are more connected because they're staying together when you're visiting another country or another city. So the world becomes more connected is this very exciting hope for hope for the world. And so I think what it does is it allows people to get really excited to join you on your journey and to join you as part of you know, where you want to go. And I think that's why the hope is such an interesting way to end, because it allows you to paint this bigger vision that you have. So maybe what you're working on right now is very specific because you have this really targeted beachhead market you're going after, but the hope allows you to sort of broaden the lens on what you want to do and how you want to change the world. And again, it's a wonderful way to show yourself as a founder, right? This allows people to see the kind of founder they are, you know, how big they really think, you know, how passionate they really are about what they want to build. So that 4-H framework for the talk track of an investor pitch, I think, can be very helpful. my students think it's really helpful. They found it to be really easy to use and easy to get their heads around. And you know, it's obviously pretty easy to teach as well. I'm going to pause here for questions again and just see if anybody has anything they want to talk about. The next section of this presentation and in the book is really about some of these behaviors and attitudes that we talk about that are so important in the pitch process. So it's about coachability and trust. And then the other piece is about bias. There's a whole chapter on navigating bias in the pitch process in the book. It's obviously a really relevant topic for right now. And the way I served it up is really a lot of what we teach here at Babson and what I've learned watching my colleagues do this, where, you know, we're really teaching our entrepreneurs how to deal with bias in the moment. And I think our students find it really helpful. And then the other piece is just about building relationships and how important that is. Brittany, anything in the chat box?
Nothing in the chat box at this time.
Okay, guys, you still with me? I hope so. So first of all, coachability matters, and I know that all of you really understand this well. I think it's important to talk to our students about being defensive in the Q&A section, because the Q&A section of a pitch competition or a pitch presentation to investors is so important. This is really the time where they can shine and show their authentic self, and so it's really important that they do show themselves as coachable and not defensive. There's a whole bunch of research, a whole bunch of academic research around coachability and why it matters. You know, entrepreneurs who are perceived as trustworthy are more likely to receive investment offers, and trustworthiness is the thing that's most linked to coachability. So, you know, there's a lot of good reasons that you can tell your students that coachability matters. And the biggest one is that they're going to get more money and they're going to get more offers for money if they are showing themselves to be coachable. There's several more studies that have been done even recently, and one by my colleague here at Babson, Lakshmi Balachandra, who talks about the more willing an entrepreneur is to accept feedback and engage with suggestions offered during a pitch, the more interested investors are in supporting the company. And so, again, you know, there's a lot of good benefit in it for them if they are perceived as coachable and if they are in fact coachable. So this slide that I share with them on the screen right now is really trying to give them some tips and talking through some tips about how to be perceived as coachable, things they can do both verbally and non-verbally to show that they are coachable, and actions they can take. Then I move on to bias, and this could be a whole separate workshop in and of itself, talking about bias in the pitch process. We all know these numbers, you know, women getting 2% of venture funding, but owning 38% of businesses in the US, and Black founders making up 1% of venture funded startups, yet making up 13% of the population. Unfortunately, you know, until the investment world changes significantly into a more diverse and inclusive realm, there will be bias, and I'd like to believe that much of it is subconscious, but there will be bias in the pitch process. And so I do think we're taking some interesting steps as a community to try and be more diverse and to help bring up venture capitalists and investors who are more diverse, because then we know that they will be more open to diverse pitches. I'm sure many of you have read the research on homophily and understand how important it is to really explaining to our students why this phenomenon happens, so that they can sort of get their heads around that it is a social psychological phenomenon. It really isn't personal, because that's another way that you can help them you know, feel like they can do something about it. And so what I teach them is this idea of spotting it and switching it. So confronting bias in the pitch process is really about noticing it, noticing when you're getting a biased question or being treated in a biased way, and trying to actively switch it in the moment. So we talk about things like, you know, when you're pitching a specialty or a female product, you know, what to do there, talking about, you know, having different perspective and how valuable that is in the startup world into finding great investments. And then we spend a bunch of time on the research from Columbia Business School that talks about this idea of prevention versus promotion, questions and answers. And for those of you who haven't read this research, I highly recommend you check it out. It's super interesting. And it's based on this work that Columbia Business School researchers did looking at a whole bunch of pitches, Q&A sections of pitches, and it talks about this idea of, you know, men tend to get asked promotion questions, which are about growth and vision, and women tend to get asked questions, prevention questions, which are about mitigating risk. And so when you're at the type of question you're asked really matters, because it generally leads to the type of answer you give. So if you're asked a promotion question, you will ask a promotion answer, and people who are asked promotion questions tend to raise 7 times more money than people who are asked prevention questions. And so, you know, given that it splits up male and female that way, you know, what we try to do is coach our female entrepreneurs to be able to notice a prevention question and turn it into a promotion answer. So things like, you know, if you're asked, you know, what are you going to do to retain your current customers? That's a mitigating risk question. That's a prevention question. And what we would talk about is this idea of like, okay, now it's your time to focus your strategy on not about not losing customers, but how you're going to, you know, use your great marketing and sales strategies and activities to gain new customers. And so the idea is you move to how you're going to win versus how you're not going to lose. And so it takes a lot of practice to spot those prevention questions. And actually what I tell a lot of my students to do is just watch a lot of Shark Tank, because they do it all the time. The male investors, and even sometimes the female investors, ask prevention questions of women. And so just get good at spotting it. And as you get good at spotting it in others, you'll be able to do it in the moment, and then to really try and switch it to something that's more about growth and mission. The other piece about, you know, building relationships that's so important in the pitch process is just this idea of knowing your audience, and the idea that pitching is personal. I talk to my students a lot about this idea, because I think that they think often that they're, you know, every investor is the same, or they can do every presentation the same over and over, and it's not going to matter. And the truth is that the more you can customize your pitch and what you're doing to the person you're pitching to, the better it's going to go, right? And that means getting to know them as people, what they care about, what are their motivations for meeting with you, you know, finding areas to connect with them personally and learning about their work. So I'm really harping on them to do really good research on who they're meeting with, and understand what their perspective might be, understand what their hot buttons might be when it comes to a startup in their industry potentially, and, you know, being really good about doing that research far beyond just looking at their LinkedIn profile, but maybe looking at their social media, or trying to find some personal connection that you might have. You know, particularly now that we're online pitching a lot, it's really hard to make that personal connection quickly. And so finding ways that you can connect personally, whether it's, you know, you both grew up in the same type of rural town, or you both care about wine tasting, or you both care about a certain philanthropy or charity work that you do, finding some kind of personal connection can help a lot. And doing that research is really important, and it takes time. And I think that sometimes students want to shortcut that process, and it's really important that they don't. And then, of course, I added a whole bunch on online pitching out into the web, where, you know, we talk about amping up your delivery and really trying to project that energy through the camera lens, that it is a lot harder for people because you're not getting anything back. So to keep up your energy, to keep it flowing through the camera, and keep people excited and engaged, I often ask them to revisit their pitch and sort of see if there's things they can cut, and really cut it down to only the essential stuff, but make more slides. So that sounds a little paradoxical, but the idea is that they're going to have less content, but more slides. So less on each slide. So they're changing the slide more often. And the idea behind changing the slide more often when you're pitching online is when you change the slide, it often brings people's attention back to the screen. And so they might reconnect where they might have kind of been distracted for a second off there. I talk to them about standing up during their pitch. You know, you can breathe better when you're standing, your diaphragm's not crunched up, you can project more energy when you're standing. Sometimes they're like, oh, my setup isn't right for me to stand, or I don't have the right equipment. I mean, those are all things that they need to do in order to prepare to pitch online. They're going to do it a lot going forward, and so getting some good lighting, getting good microphones, getting a really strong internet connection, all those things are super important to being successful with that. Also practicing Q&A in a tech environment. I think, you know, a lot of role playing that we do at the Blank Center is about role playing that Q&A section where they can really show themselves to be coachable and insightful and thoughtful about their business. I mean, one of the examples we use is this idea that you'll probably get asked, what's your cost of customer acquisition? Like the first thing out of an investor's mouth if you didn't address it in your pitch. And ultimately, they're not necessarily looking for that you have the exact right answer, but that your answer contains data and information and insight that shows you to be thoughtful and knowledgeable. So again, it's this idea of like the pitch being a way for them to get to know you and the kind of founder you are. And then last, I always talk about this idea of controlling your background. I was recently on a pitch and the pitcher had his dirty laundry basket in the background, and it was kind of in the corner. And yes, we all have dirty laundry, so it's like not the end of the world, but like, I don't want to see your dirty laundry when you're pitching. So just make sure that you're in a very neutral background and you don't have a lot going on. And that's what I tell them to do. So controlling for noise, controlling for background, and just making sure that it's a really, really, you know, neutral way to deliver your pitch. So I'll pause here for questions or wrap up. I know we're coming up on the hour, and so I want to be respectful of your time. There's a ton more in the book. There are lots of exercises that go with these things in the book, worksheets and exercises and ideas for them to take action against these pieces of their pitch. And resources on my website for additional ideas or places to go, particularly around designing slides, designing logos, and, you know, getting the kind of creative help that they might need that they might not necessarily have in terms of putting together the deck itself. So I hope you'll check out the book. It's on Amazon. I'll put the link in the chat if anybody wants to check it out. Any questions? All right, well, if you want to reach out to me anytime and talk about any of these things, I love to talk about this topic, obviously. And I'd also, if you do use any of these tactics or frameworks, I'd love to know how your students perceive them and use them and if they found them helpful, so we can continue as a community to make this stuff better and more easy for students to learn, easier for students to learn, but also easier for us as educators to teach, because ultimately, you know, we're going to be doing this all the time with our students, and having fun with it and making it easier to teach is the goal. So I'm excited that you all joined me today, and thank you, and I hope you got a lot from it. Brittany, anything to close?
Thank you all for joining us today. It was a pleasure. Remember to get those submissions in by October 4th. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.